Hi everyone, this is Robin Drake, and I was meant to give a talk at IFES in New Delhi, and well, visa problems stopped me from coming. I did learn a bit about India with my visa problems, but anyway, that would take a longer talk than I got today. But I want to talk about trends and futures for exhibitions and events. And I find it a really interesting area. It's something that you all probably know some of the things I'm going to show you, but probably not all of them. And I guess I have to start with a simple way of talking about it. It's all comes from my students at FIT. Our exhibition design students are, as you know by now from Brenda, multicultural. Everybody's from someplace else. We usually only have a couple of Americans in the class. So anyway, I think part of my interest does come from the students. They're absolutely experts on the present. So it makes a lot of sense to listen to them and to hear what they're interested in and to see the way they work. So many of the things that you're going to see are really introduced to me by students who had deep, concerns and feelings about some of the new things that are coming out. Um, what I'm going to do is talk about it in three different ways. A little bit about materials, although it's not going to be a detailed about specific materials. Um, then I'm going to talk about process, the design process, and trends that are really affecting the way the exhibit comes out because that's the way we're doing things. And process, which is smack in the middle there. The process is very, very interesting. There are three completely different things that I'm going to focus on, different ways of working and really different perspectives. So that's sort of my starting point, and we'll go through each one of these areas, and some of them are longer, and some of them are more detailed, and some of them are, well, very practical. So anyway, we'll start. What I'm not going to talk about, I have to say, are the two huge trends, things green and LED lighting. That is affecting us greatly, and those are kind of overarching areas, and they can even relate to each other or not. But I'm not going to go into those. I'm simply not qualified to talk about them. I'm not. It's not an area that I'm an expert in. But to start it off, the big trend, one of the biggest trends, and it really started with the oil crisis when things got expensive to move around, is lighter and lighter. We seem to be moving in that direction, that our exhibits and even our events are we look for things that are light, things that aren't going to cost a lot to move, that are probably a lot easier to attach, to put together because they're light. That's one big trend, and then we'll look at some other ones. But to start with that, I thought I'd start with something that we were kind of familiar with in the U.S. We don't have a lot, or I don't think we really have any big buildings here by Zaha Hadid, but this was an important one for us in a way, even though it was a temporary building and it came and went very quickly. We had another tiny Zaha Hadid building, arrive, but there's some, and maybe 5 years ago it was for one of the um, fashion companies, and it spent a very short few days in Central Park and then left, and it was a fiberglass structure. But this one was in our Millennium Park in Chicago, and it's fabric, and that's sort of the first light material that has transformed, I think, the way we work, mostly because of the reason that graphics can suddenly be very, very good on fabric. That was not true before the digital printing. So all of these things have different references to them. But here we are with this little structure in Millennium Park, and it didn't really have an exhibit inside. The building itself was really an exhibit, and that's also a trend, is to focus on sometimes the architecture, where that's the message is, in fact, the architecture. The other thing that happens with fabric, it does mate really well with LED lighting and any kind of light, but LED is, as I said before, is transforming a lot of things. And here we see at nighttime, and it can also change to other colors and change its viewpoint. And feeling, here's the bones part of it all. And this was constructed by Fabric Images in Chicago. And they put the whole thing together and put the fabric on and completed the structural part. I mean, it's very nice to see this picture with the structure so clearly kind of defined. At the same time, it's also showing another trend. And the other trend is you don't see the same part repeated. There's nothing modular about it. That's a huge thing that's happening, and we'll cover that later when we move into some other design parts in another part of this talk. Even up the blue photo at the top shows us very nicely how the structure works. And you can see it's sort of something that grows from small and gets bigger and then gets smaller again, and it twists. And so it has an organic aspect to it. It may not be a copy of a shell or a clamshell or something like that, but it certainly has that quality. And so there are a number of converging trends in this structure. And it came and it went. It's not there anymore. When I always like to look at where we were. It's not too different from this. This is an airship being built in a hangar, an enormous hangar. And if we look at the airship and think back of what we saw in Zaha Hadid's work, there's a real similarity. The differences are also there. I mean, the pieces are. This is a lot more modular in the way it's constructed, and it tends to start in one way, get bigger, and then get smaller very simply, and it's doing it pretty much symmetrically. Her structure was very asymmetric. So that's something to kind of look at from the past and realize it's not all that new, what's being done, but it's very important that we're doing it now. It's the lightness, the easy aspect of putting it together. All of the work, so much of the work must go into computing, the figuring out how big everything has to be, and then fabricating it. It doesn't lend itself to the normal fabrication techniques easily. This too was a very significant piece back in, I think it was 1956 in Brussels, and 58, sorry. And this was, in fact, designed in part by Le Corbusier and in part by a structural engineer, Xenakis. And at the time, it was it was kind of it was covered in concrete, a very, very light concrete. But had this been done today, we have fabrics that have Teflon, we have other things. It absolutely would have been a fabric structure, but everything about it it looks like a tent in part. It has all of the aspects of a fabric structure. That was in 1958. If we go down the list from the top, it's the pictures from the top. There's Le Corbusier, there's Xenakis, and Edgar Varese, the composer, and I'll get to him in a minute. Coming down as the little model, and then doesn't that sort of bear some relationship between what we saw from Zaha Hadid? I mean, it's a wireframe model essentially, and while it wasn't a fabric, it was a light coating of concrete, probably on some kind of mesh fabric, maybe a metal mesh fabric, but a fabric nonetheless. The photo below is notable. It's hard to read, I realize, and hard to understand. Corbusier designed all the signage, and the signage was done as like structures, and at the time he used neon lighting, and that was considered very, very radical to say things. So people came in, and the signage was, or on the outside was in neon, and it was on this strange little structure. You can kind of see it in the black and white thing too, on the photo on the left. What's also noticeable, as well as the crowd there, it's not even close to the kind of crowds that we have at today's big exhibits. And in the bottom is a photograph. There were pictures projected. I don't know who was responsible for that. I think it was Le Corbusier, but I'm not certain. And this wonderful music, Poème électronique by Edgar Varese, was played at this particular thing. So I'm jumping a little bit, but here was your total exhibit with all the senses kind of engaged. And it was thought of as a total work of art. And that was sort of the beginning of, I think, putting all these different arts together in an exhibit. It's not just about the interior architecture. Where are we going with this? My prediction is even lighter in the future. And when I say that, I think it means that we'll probably be using much lighter weight structural materials, whether it's carbon fiber rods or fiberglass rods, or maybe still metal rods, but they can be a lot thinner. The engineering can be a lot tighter. If we look at this tent structure, it's an exoskeleton, holding up the interior skin, which is kind of hanging. And I think the development of this and moving forward really has to do with hardware. How do we attach these things? Because I think we've got the basic approach. We know what we're doing. We can use the metal, or the new materials to hold things. But how do we attach the fabric to the frame? How do we get the skin and bones together? Is probably the problem. And this is if we imagine the tent that's down there by North Face. It's a pretty nice looking structure. It comes in that package. It's easy to put together. It's light, very, very light. Going back even further, look at these. These are just about the best exhibit structures I've seen in a long time, and they're from the Siksika, I guess it's tribe in Canada. They're teepees. Look at the graphics, how wonderful the branding is, the colors. These are, based on old folk tents, and there's certainly a lot in the Arab world. There are lots of tents to look at. There are lots of precedents here. I mean, we don't have to sort of create everything new. There's some great things in history, and it's part of our human tradition to build things like this that are light and that move. And after all, that's pretty much what we do in exhibit design. Staying in the theme of lighter and lighter, turning a focus onto paper as a particular material. Here's a paper airplane, kind of symbolizing lighter and lighter and the focus on paper. So anyway, moving a little further along, you can fold it, you can emboss it, you can cut it, you can crumble it, you can glue it, and tear it. It's kid stuff, and we've all had experiences with paper growing up. I think it's probably the first toy we really get. There's probably some kind of paper that we either crumble or something or throw at our siblings, but it's so available, and paper is absolutely a light material that's so important right now. And it's to say there's paper is one thing. There isn't. Paper is so many different things, so many different kinds of paper, synthetic papers and other kinds of paper. Moving ahead, we also have in every culture just about a tradition of working with paper. Up at the top is an old silhouette, probably from the 1700s, from the U.S. and Europe. Did paper silhouettes. Every culture, Mexico has its papers. It has the wonderful little flags, the cut designs. Thailand has its little puppets made out of paper. China has beautiful, beautiful cut paper motifs. And India has some. In Korea also, another place. And on the very bottom left, I put the newest machine you can buy, which is for home use, where you can create your own laser cut design right at home with a very small machine. It's in U.S. dollars, it's about $500. So everybody can now get to work with laser cutting paper. And on the right is that doily that sort of shows what paper cutting is about, right bottom. We'll use that to identify things. Okay, so laser cutting. Here's laser drop, and it's from Procédé Chanel. And we work with Procédé Chanel in New York from time to time, and the students work developing projects using the different papers and looking at the paper for inspiration. So laser cutting is really one of the big trends that's out there now, and in many forms, not just with paper, but also fabric and all kinds of things can actually be cut with a laser. But cutting paper is very satisfying. And quick and easy and not terribly expensive. And on the left is a design from the Procédé Chanel website showing a small cut paper chandelier underneath a larger paper cut roof. On the right is another detail from the thing we just looked at, but for use as a screen. Laser drop, that was laser drop. And here we've got paper drop. And how beautiful is this stuff with the right lighting on? So simple and totally creates a mood. It's light, it's simple, it's colorful, it's delectable. And this is really, so paper, which seems so sometimes not serious, can get very serious and can solve our design and display problems really, really well. Here it is again, laser cut, but in a very geometric way, used in a very static way as a simple screen that becomes an optical illusion, an optical trick. And I think this has great value as well. It doesn't have to be something organic that you cut out or anything complicated. It lets us do screens, simple screens, which are always effective tools. Here we are with something more decorative. I mean, here we really depend upon the different decorations that are here, and you're looking at laser cut designs and other procédés product. Again, with the lighting, you really want to show paper with really great lighting all the time, because it absorbs light and it filters it and exposes things that become designs. The next thing is we back looking at that paper bell that's on the bottom right. Cutting and gluing, the two things go together well, and gives us other options. Important options for flexibility, for collapsing and folding and pulling apart and making it big and small. It's very big now, and it's very, very useful. Here's a whole ceiling covered, beautiful ceiling, honeycomb ceiling designed by Paolo Narbone, and once again it's from Procédés Chanel website. But such a good solution, such a simple solution, such a lightweight solution. There's not acoustical tile there in this situation. It becomes decorative, but not probably overwhelmingly, intense. I mean, you can look at it or not. It filters the light, and it's very, very lightweight. Here too, another thing called pipe and drop, which I guess is their drop paper used as a barricade or partition, and it's a little bit of a play on pipe and drape, which is so ugly and uninspiring when you can have something like this as a space divider with proper lighting with it. Turns into something quite beautiful, memorable, and so quick. I know we used this at FIT to do an exhibition on photography, just making special little galleries so easily. We were able to put it up and take it down in such fast time, and put it in a small box and keep it for the next time. So once again, the lighter and lighter and does not mean thinner and thinner. It can mean fairly dense, and I think there's probably good sound absorbing qualities with this as well. Another in North America, Molo Design produces the same kind of a thing with paper walls. They also have a lot of other paper products that are interesting, some lamps now and other things that they've branched into. And here it is, a similar wall in white. Just leaving the typical kind of cut and paste, just in folding paper now. We look at the model airplane and the paper airplane in the lower right, as talk about folding. That's the simplest thing, and I made them when I was a kid. But something complex, like what we're looking at here, it's a wall being created. It was created by students from Łódź University in Poland, and it's a very interesting paper structure. It's complicated. It's a folded kind of paper. I suspect there might be some gluing involved here too, but it's complex folding. It's the kind of folding that is generally referred to as, like, you need a paper engineer to do. And it certainly requires a great technical skills, and you have to pick the right paper. I don't have any idea what kind of a paper they used, but it appears to be something like Bristol board. Don't look for standard looking things from now on. Everything, simple walls are no longer simple walls. They might be something like this. And there are options and things with these cavity structures where, other panels can be put in and for displaying and for doing a variety of things. So in the end, in an exhibit, these panels might have, the pieces rather might have panels that have graphics on them, or there may be, colored light that's worked into it in some way too. Moving forward, another folded paper. This is actually something that, if you look at an individual piece, which is on the lower right-hand corner, you can see that it's sort of a star. And this is a modular piece where lots of these kind of fat little stars are put together. And the big advantage here is lighting is integrated, and what a job it does. So while this is put together in a kind of 20th century way in terms of it being a modular and one piece repeated many, many times, the lighting here, patterns and things become really very, very unusual and does a lot to create interest. We don't see the star as much as we see the lights moving through it, and the kind of effect as we move through it is probably quite different. And once again, while I'm not focusing on LED, you can see what importance it has now. Something like this would really not be possible with incandescent lighting. It would get too hot, it might burn or whatever, or it's very hard to distribute the light the way it's distributed here. So kind of looking at the possibilities of folding, we haven't really seen large-scale things that are exhibition size yet. I mean, really, they're pieces like the students did from lotes that are put together, but we haven't seen that. What we will see later when we look too is that paper can be, used as a model for another material. It can be used as a starting point. And some of the qualities of folded paper particularly are easily reproducible by engineering methods to translate to other materials like a metal panel, for example. The chair that's folded on the right, lower right, is probably as big as we can get with paper, not too much bigger than that. So that's been a limitation, but it's still very important. The man on the left, lower left, is holding something very, very complex that could in turn be interpreted maybe in another plate material. So air is really the next material, and it's almost makes me laugh talking about it, but here's our Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade balloon, Snoopy, and look how it's quite large, and it's probably 100 feet long. I was lucky enough once, I had a friend who worked at Macy's, and I was on a balloon crew, and I had Bullwinkle balloon, and it was quite an experience. I mean, the best experience was inhaling all of the helium at the end when they collapsed the balloon, and we all started talking like characters in Wizard of Oz, like the Munchkins. That was a big thing, and anyway, but it obviously lends itself to large scale. Here, I'm kind of focusing most of this from a company in the UK called Inflate UK. And on their own site, they say 99% air, 100% reusable. And they're right. All things considered, when you collapse everything, it's only 1% of the volume is taken up by the material, and the other 99% is air. It's both the air inside and the air within the cavity here. And anyway, so we've seen a lot of these structures in the U.S. We see them as tennis courts mostly, but they're not double skin. They're generally single skin, and they have heavy supports inside in case the power fails, which it does even in New York. They did this, I think, to show that even a rectangle is inflatable. Not 100%, convincing. You can see the way it kind of sagging at the top right, but it can be done, and these look like large mattresses that were put together, and so the fact that you can do just about anything with it is, in any shape, is pretty good. Oops, went a little too far with that one. Okay, what it does seem to do best of all, if you've got something that you've got a caterpillar and you want the caterpillar to be your exhibit shape, it can somehow take these things pretty well. They can make almost anything out of it, as the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade in New York sort of proves. You can make anything, almost any shape. And their Inflate UK is very proud of the things they've done, the customizing. You do need to, here you can see these, if you can pick an animal or a plant or something that does have ribs where you can make a wall, then you've got something that holds itself up pretty much, and you don't have to worry too much about bringing in a steel or aluminum or any other kind of structure. We also see it a lot outside, and it needs to be weighted down, of course, but here's a little BMW, I guess, pop-up showroom there for introducing a new car. Um, and this seems good, particularly in areas where you might have structural issues putting anything else up. You, as long as the fan can blow it up and keep it inflated, you've got something, and you have something that's not dangerous. So it also has this big use, I think, outside and as pop-up things, um, because it's soft, so we don't worry too much about it. The other thing I'm sort of wondering is like whether they'll continue to be popular. I think, aren't we always afraid it might deflate? At least I am, and that comes from childhood disappointments of having balloons fade or break. Um, I don't know if it's a trend that's going to be as strong as the fabric and thing we first looked at, but it's there and it's extremely useful. And I think, as I pointed out, if you've got something special you want to do, you can probably create it. So that's a big plus, like the Caterpillar showroom, whatever it was. Um, Transformation. This, I sort of didn't know exactly which word to use for the category of three things that I'm going to talk about, but the picture you just saw was, of course, from a transformer toy, which is repeated on the right here with the car, because the car turns into a robot person with a lot of personality, by the way. So anyway, but transformation, I really didn't want to use the usual thing of the caterpillar turning into a butterfly. I just couldn't do it. So I did find a simple thing. It's so simple, using a triangle, and it's transformed by reflection, rotation, or what is it? Transition. So translation, I think it is. So anyway, there's that triangle in blue, and then the red one right next to it with reflection and rotation and translation, where it goes from blue to red. I mean, that's a simple kind of transformation, but we're going to focus on three very, very different types of transforming uh, uh, categories: biological, mathematical, and mechanical. Because I think that these are real trends, and we need to kind of pay a little attention to them. I'm also focusing on one person for each one of these. There are other people that could be, there are enough people in all of these areas to change, but these are people I'm a little bit familiar with, or their work. So these are the ones I use, and I think the Mark Forns was introduced to me by a student. And Chuck Hoberman works in New York, so people sort of know about Chuck Hoberman. His work has been in the Museum of Modern Art. These three people have also really had a fair amount of publicity. So growing, it's all about sort of growth in some way, either some kind of growth, not just biological, but it could be mathematical. But biomimetics, which is the first topic, is really about organic growing. And an example of copying nature, is really what it is, was the one we know about too, the Velcro. It was a thistle and plant. It was the kind of looking at the thistle that inspired Velcro. This is kind of a simple, direct relationship. There's other things where fish, like the cuttlefish, was used to design the first Honda electric car. There are small examples that are kind of superficial, but what we're talking about now is something more evolutionary. And Dennis Dollins is the focal person, the point person for this. And it's something we see in biodigital architecture is what he calls it. He actually can work on his projects from an iPhone. You can download some of these different programs on an iPhone or iPad. Anyway, and the title in Blueprint magazine about his work was "It's Alive," and it is alive. Here we have his interpretation of an apartment house. Excuse me, starting from in the basement over here where it looks on the extreme left. It looks like tubers holding down, down the thing, not a traditional foundation, kind of tubers attached to stems that grow up into the structure. And the stems are either, maybe they're electrical supply, maybe they're plumbing, maybe it's the water, maybe they're communications vines. The lighting. The power comes from the leaves, which are solar collectors. The little apartments are the seed pods, which are square shaped but all bunched together. So that's kind of the way this was interpreted. Moving still further along, this is really instructive, and we're not anywhere near practicality with any of this, but it's a theoretical explanation of taking the worm and showing the relationship between what might be that magenta stripe that comes through, might be the food, the blood, or the kind of the food, and it shows up with little foodlets and other little magenta pods, and it comes in also. Maybe the red is the nervous system. The green sacs are obviously food sources, and the food sources move along maybe on the outside too. It's a kind of a study of a whole kind of, the difference is that here's something that we could call it an apartment house too. It's like it exposes different ways to think about not only the structure but the different things that make it work, the organs, let's say. What Dennis Dollins does is he combines two programs, XFrog, which is represented on the left, and Rhino, which is probably you're familiar with. It could be Maya, it could be another sort of animation program, but these two things come together. The XFrog has downloadable natural systems. Like you can get a whole tree downloaded, a particular tree, and you can get insects and you can find them and bring them into computer and then work with Rhino to restructure it. And in the middle is a Rhino drawing. By working on scripts and other technical things, you can kind of duplicate that structure in a way that gives you a form, a usable form. Looking at it, how new is this? It's not so new, really, because here's good old Art Nouveau. And this beautiful, Paris metro station by Hector Guimard is so beautiful. And really, what's the difference between what Dennis is doing? Well, there are differences. I mean, the one is the amount of interior use, and this is pretty much structural and decorative. But it's really the same idea. It's really still Art Nouveau. And Art Nouveau, I mean, if we start on the left with Guimard, and then there's we've got Mackintosh, Charles Rennie Mackintosh, Margaret MacDonald, his wife, responsible in Scotland. We have Antonio Gaudí and Josep Jujol in Barcelona, of their own particular and peculiar form of Art Nouveau. The same topic, different directions actually earlier. William Morris, his wife Jane Burden, who supplied much of for all of his portrait work and other things. And you can see by her clothing, you've got someone very much in this kind of different spirit of things, of nature. And then in America, Richardson a little, but mostly Sullivan, who really developed incredible decorative techniques on his buildings, using nature. So it's not really new. It's not a new area, but there are new developments. Ending this part of it with this, it's simply another way to design using nature. And while this was probably not directly, connected to a particular biological form, I think we begin to see in this football shoe that there's something there that's definitely not really just about geometry. It's different structures, but it has geometry, but it's, after all, it fits on a human foot, so it's organic to begin with. But it definitely sort of has this flavor and influence. It's on the shoes. Okay, the next one is parametric design, and I thought it needed a bit of a formal introduction because I didn't know what it means. I really didn't know how to explain it. But if you read it, and I'll give you a minute to read it, I think it's pretty useful definition, and it comes from paramediccamp.com if anyone's interested in following up on what parametrics are. So if we just think of the column as a formal possibility, and in other words, it's saying it's not starting with a column. It's not a beam and a post situation, but it's about putting together actually a program using algorithms to come up with not just shape, but all these different possibilities. So many things are put into this. It changes and varies. It's not just about the structure, and then it's not about the interior. It's putting things together and looking at a number of possibilities. And that's something that's, probably overlooked, is that for everything you see with parametrics, there probably are a good number of things that go with it as other options. If I had to explain what an algorithm is, I always like the Brooklyn Bridge, or specifically the cables on the bridge. The cables are beautiful, and it's the best looking bridge. To me, it's the most modern bridge of the lot. It just shows, as each one of those cables advances, both vertically and horizontally, it changes shape a little bit till it gets to the top or the bottom, depending on what direction you're going. It goes from small to big and from high to low. You can see too how, as you look at this in the lower right-hand part, how our eye turns them into sort of diamond shapes from rectangles, and sort of this advance, this growth. Again, it shows that this is doing it in a much more orderly way than the kinds of things that or orderly or static way, I should say, rather than the kinds of things that are envisioned by our next person, Mark Fornes. And his blog it's Mark Fornes and the Very Many. Has to do with a lot of pieces, a lot of pieces. And he's a structural theorist. He spent, I think, quite a bit of time in Paris, where a lot of really great structural theory, the theorist Robert Loricollet sort of preceded this guy, and he lives in New York and moves around and lectures and visits a lot of different places. Again, we're talking about theory and change, so it's not anything at the moment that seems terribly practical, but we can see something he's done that's practical. But an impractical side, or not knowing what it is, isn't as amazing. I mean, this is just, and the Very Many comes from one piece. They make many pieces from a changing algorithm that reshapes and reorganizes. I forgot to point that out on the black and white part, but it changes a little bit. Each one is a little bit different and connects in a different way to something adjacent to it. So the Very Many was a very smart and useful idea that he had called his blog and his field of study. That was from the Pompidou Center. This one is something he created at the Washington University in St. Louis in the U.S. They are really sculptural. They're structural sculptures. How's that? And they don't really have a practical purpose at the moment. But that's not important. That's not what they're about. But the idea and the method is very, very interesting, the way forms are generated from algorithms, in part. Okay, here's something he did fairly recently. It's a Louis Vuitton store in Selfridges in London, and it was for the opening of a Japanese clothing and ready-to-wear designer and accessory line. And the designer's sort of well known for his polka dots. So here is something sort of all based on polka dots. On the bottom right, you can see that it was big. This was not just one room. It was a fairly large space. It's really a little different from the things he's done. It seems to involve laser cutting, simpler things than he. It's not working with a lot of small pieces. That's the big difference. But he was hired and he created this rather arresting place that does certainly focus your attention, and it's kind of a pop-up store. So there we are in the exhibit area again. How does it go together? I mean, here's the funny part of it. It goes together. It looks like piece by piece, and here are students assembling part of it. There's part of the workshop. So it's not like our typical things that go together really quickly, although the Louis Vuitton thing was made to go together fairly quickly. You can see on the right it's a little bit different. There aren't small pieces, many small pieces. There are lots of big pieces and some small pieces, but in the top right, the colorful thing is from a botanic garden, and I think in Denver. Um, but it's time consuming, and the assembly line is, you have a lot of pieces. They're small. It's done, but it has to go together, and you have to know how to put them together because it's not obvious. So that's probably why they're not why this is not used. Although it could be pre-assembled, I guess, and that's a possibility. Um, this I thought was interesting. Even though Mark Fornes uses the very many, here's the original very many, the brick. And look what we did with the bricks. We did pretty well with brick, and one being one thing, and using lots and lots of them. On the left is a typical Catalan brick vault that was being built fairly recently in Barcelona, and on the right is a beautiful um, brick vaulted structure with a dome, even from Iran. That's, I don't know how old it is, but it's very old. So the fact that they're single pieces does not mean it's the end, but you can see what we did with bricks. It's just a matter of like trade shows. We don't have time. That's something, these are time consuming, but lighter weight than bricks. This I found, I put this together myself because this is just a roof of a dome and fairly modern reconstruction in Ankara. But I put it together because it really, his work seems to have the quality of the Byzantine things, even though it's a little more organic. When I look at this and I put these together, I thought, it's not unlike some of the things Mark Fornes ends up doing. So, I mean, this is just a stylistic reference. It's not necessarily a structural reference, but seem to be qualities that are shared between something like the Islamic architecture. The last person in this area, transformation, where it actually is mechanical. Um, it's all theoretical again, prototyping, though he does have some practical work to show, which we'll look at. The dome, the Chuck Hoberman dome is kind of famous. And if you can take a minute and read the top part, I think it's very, very useful to read that and understand what his work is about. So I think if we look at the dome on the extreme right, that could be a dome that, say, Bucky Fuller designed, but it's not because it moves, it transforms from something small to the full dome. I think we can look at this short video. It's pretty instructive. Here's the Hoberman spear, which became a toy that you can buy at any toy store, or a lot of them, and they sell it at the MoMA, Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it's a wonderful toy. It can get small enough to go in a toy box, or you can just play with it yourself and have fun. It is, once you get it, you do tend to get a little bit involved with the thing, so it's very interactive. And I think it, kind of, and here's a full-size one, by the way, another area. And okay, you guys got to jump down and open it up, but there it is. So to move on further, and yet another video, besides domes, he's done arches, and here we're going to see an arch that he did for a stage in Utah. And it changes and moves, and once again, the lighting is a big part of this, which we're not focusing on, but it sure helps. But I think for a large dome where maybe people don't look very important, you need something that's going to draw attention, and I think this certainly, helps and shows how, how nicely it can sort of add movement and life to something. Here too is a helix that descends from a staircase well and back up again, and kind of, I think, engages people to look at the exhibit at Discovery World. This is in Wisconsin, so it's theoretical, and it's useful, and it's interesting. Previously, if you've been to Paris and saw the the Monde Arabe by Jean Nouvel. He had windows. I don't have any video of this, unfortunately, but the windows had like retinas that closed and opened. And this was a kind, like the first time I saw this kind of interaction and integrated into architecture. But I think that's where we're going, more interaction. If you can listen to this, I think, or watch this rather, it's really instructive. I'll sort of narrate a very different thing. We're going to play make-believe. We're going to make believe that you have an exhibit that is going to Mars. So first of all, we've got to send it by FedEx. So we're sending it by DHL or FedEx in their plane. When it gets close enough, it comes in a special package, and we're going to see the package in a minute. Here's the package is lowering itself, on a parachute, obviously, and we're going to land it. So we're going to get there. Okay, there's our package, and it's coming down to be delivered for its exhibit on Mars. This will take a little time. We got to prepare ourselves for the bubble wrap, which is now attached. It wasn't necessary before, but now we got bubble wrap on our package. Big piece of bubble wrap. Now it's on FedEx ground, and the person's in the van driving it to your exhibit space, bouncing along. I don't really know how to edit, so I could have cut a little out of this, but you'll have to bear with me until it finishes bouncing. Soon it will, until it finds just exactly the right spot. And when it finds the right spot, it's going to stop and open up itself, all by itself. You don't even have to pull those tabs. So, okay, it opened itself, it deflated its bubble wrap, and now we're laying the carpet. The carpet's going down, and soon it's going to be flat on the floor, so we can start with the rest of our exhibit. We need to first get power that's in the ceiling, so I think we can expect our little power collectors to open up to get the power. We don't need to plug this thing in. It's going to take it from the light inside the exhibit hall, which is the moon, or the sun. It unfolds itself. We now have enough power so we can start putting in our other lighting and our sound system, which is going to pop up in a minute. And okay, there it goes, and we're pretty much set now to start our exhibit, and we're just collecting all the information too for our digital projection. That's all being set up, and we're done. It's going to protect everything else. So I thought that was interesting because here it is. It was probably the way a totally mechanized exhibit might roll in, just the way these new robot vacuum cleaners work. It might end up being rolled in and right for view.
First of all, ask the questions, well, what do we need the skin of a car for anyway? What's it there for? Does it have to be made out of metal? Do we have to make it always in the same manner? Or is it there for different purposes than we thought? In reality, the aspects of crash and stiffness and ride handling can be handled in a space frame type vehicle entirely without the skin. And therefore, to go away from a metal skin and to have a skin that offers different capabilities, can move, can do things that a fixed rigid structure couldn't do, can be lighter, made out of materials which require less energy to make them. That's something that the GINA Light model brings as a question. GINA is an acronym, a set of letters that stand for geometry, shapes, and function, how things work, in N as a way of saying infinite number, of adaptations, meaning there's a lot of change possible. This started a whole chain of ideas within the company here that Gina became not just a model that became a shape or just about cloth as a skin. It became about a thinking process, a philosophy that said, let's do things differently. Let's let materials talk in a different manner. And let's let tooling be a different issue instead of just the way to give us form. Well, one nice thing about Gina is the materials kind of lead the way. It doesn't take very much and you get an idea exactly what this car is going to be like. For instance, to get an idea what the sculptural form is between a fender and, let's say, a wheel arch, you really only need a line around the wheels and a line more or less where you want the fender to be, and you'll let the material do the talking in between. And then, just like you would if you were getting a suit made, you made the first mock-up, you made the first forms and patterns, you sewed it up, you tried it out, made another one a little bit closer, and when you finally got the final one, zip, you put it on. It takes about 2 hours to put the skin on this car. Emotion is really the added value to this. I mean, one way is saying you get better function or you get better alternative ways of doing things, but really we want to achieve a higher emotional plane out of this. And then finally, and I think this is to me one of the most importantly, and that is the level of humanistic content that we can bring with Gina in. Gina should be about the human in the loop, the human way of doing things. The Gina philosophy, in its short form, is about being flexible. Thinking flexible, acting flexible, context over dogma. That's it.
Okay, I think there's a lot of really useful things in that last one. It combines the fabric idea, moving, a number of the things we looked at. I see I've spelled prototype wrong, I'm sorry. Anyway, moving on, let me go back, sorry. This is going to be quicker. Prototypes are also affecting things, and prototype construction, here we have a small model of a rhino head that comes from our FIT fab lab. And what is interesting is that it also, this kind of use of things ends up being a way to also organize and build in another situation, in a store, an exhibit. So we're starting to see how this prototype methods, the latest ones, carry off and actually change designs. A little more serious rendition, Longchamp store in New York, Jeremy Scott put this together, has those same qualities to it that the prototype models do, and you kind of wonder, yeah, well, it's just a big prototype now. Here too, as the steel structure, a Japanese company did, I guess, the parking garage. This is not it. I'm assuming this is just a rendering, but it very much used the paper folding techniques that we saw before to define the steel structure. You know, and also I consider prototyping also what we can do visually. This is completely all done, you know, online in the, you know, with the computer. It's a kind of prototype. And here's another one, same thing. It's a computer-generated image. It seems to be real. It's a kind of prototype. It's not as effective, in my opinion, as models, but it needs to be looked at. Here we have a real small model from one of our students did about talking about how an ant farm and tunnels in an ant farm, you know, help the ants all get together and do things. It's for kids. And it was a testing prototype. It's, you know, where we try something. This is midway through. It's not rough, but it's nice to have this. Everybody came in and tried it out to see if it worked, and then eventually, if it was improved after that, we would test it with students. This is what Dennis Dahlin's prototypes look like. They're from they're resin models that are generated by 3D printing process and delivered to him in a box. So this too is like part of the process. Very, very last, I've left this for you to look at, and if you can, go to the YouTube and see the whole thing. I'm going to end with this because it's the most basic kind of prototype idea. It's a ad hoc. You just put it together yourself and you move along with it. So let's see what this 10-year-old kid does and did, and I'll kind of sign off with this thing to keep in memory, because I think this is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Go to the real one and see the whole thing. This is a little clip from it.
It's a funhouse arcade made of cardboard boxes.
The first game I made.
9-year-old Kane Monroy built it in his dad's auto parts store at a junkyard in East LA.
Here we go.
Kane's arcade is pretty intricate.
I missed.
There's basketball and soccer and a homemade claw machine.
I got tokens, passes, and prizes.
He used his own toys for prizes. Everything manual. The one thing Kane didn't have was customers. Kids at school didn't even believe he had an arcade. Then filmmaker Nirvan Melick walked in, looking for a car door handle. Instead, he found a movie.
And then when you score a point, he would crawl into the box, and he pulls out these little tickets out of the side of the cardboard.
Like real arcade games, tickets come from the bottom.
And I was like, this kid's a genius.
So anyway, that's what I thought I'd end with is a 9-year-old working on a prototype. Probably the most important thing of the whole thing. It's a trend. When you're a kid, it's the best trend there is. Anyway, I hope I've opened up some windows. And if you need to contact me, I did put my email on the beginning of this. So anyway, thank you, and hope